Hi everyone, we're going to give people about another 30 seconds before we get started. Thank you for joining us. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get our webinar started. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the American Federation of Teachers. My name is Nicole Hochbrunn, and I work here at AFT in the Higher Education Division. And thank you for joining our webinar on our new campaign, Do Your Homework, on the impact of the repeal of the gainful employment regulation on continuing education. I'd like to introduce Jeff Freitas, the president of the California Federation of Teachers, and Michael Rosen, the former president, the now retired president of Local 212, the faculty union at Milwaukee Area Technical College, who will be joining me on this webinar today, providing some expertise and perspective on these issues. But before I begin, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. First, attendees, you might notice that you are muted throughout this webinar. You will not be able to unmute yourselves, but we do want this experience to be interactive and engaging for people. If you move your mouse to the bottom of the screen, you'll see several widgets that we'll use throughout the webinar to interact with you, including the group chat. You can open the group chat button at the bottom of your screen and tell us who you are and where you're tuning in from, and you can use this chat button to talk to other attendees. There's also the questions widget. You can use the Q&A widget if you have any questions that you would like to ask the presenters during the webinar. I'll be moderating a question and answer session at the end of this webinar. If you have any technical issues, you can also submit those in the question and answer box, and we'll type a response out to you. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce Jeff Freitas of the California Federation of Teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. And thank you, everybody, for joining and watching this. Welcome to AFT's webinar. And thank you for joining on such a short notice. It was important to us to get this information out to members as soon as possible, since we know many union members research and apply to continuing education programs each year. This session will also be recorded for future reference in case you don't capture all the notes or you want to share it with your members later. We're here, we're all here from within AFT from different divisions with different news habits, learning about the news in many different ways. And you may have been following education news very closely or not at all, but you probably know who Betsy DeVos is. And the Department of Education, under her direction, has been wreaking havoc throughout the education system in the US. You may be familiar with DeVos's work privatizing K-12 education, or erasing many of the protections for our diverse population, or even the fact that she has ignored people with student debt. Student debt, I might add, is the second largest debt in this country, second only to mortgage debt. You may not know some of the details in which she's been doing in her recent erasing crucial protections in higher education. All AFT members considering a certificate or a degree program to advance their career should know that, that the gainful employment rule has been rescinded. We will get to what gainful employment rule means in a bit, but the elimination of this rule will now require AFT members to really do their homework to ensure that the colleges and the programs that these colleges are offering are living up to those promises. That's why we're calling this campaign the Do Your Homework campaign. And I want to let you know that all the materials that we are going to talk about today are available on our campaign website. That's www.aftcontinuinged.org. I'm going to repeat that, www.aftcontinuinged.org. AFTcontinuinged.org, AFTcontinuinged.org. So, what is gainful employment? Before it was repealed, the gainful employment rule applied to all career education programs based on a requirement under the Higher Education Act that those programs need to lead towards a gainful employment. The rule covered nearly 38,000 programs, enrolling almost 4 million students when it first was introduced. Of those programs, 61% were offered by public colleges, 6% were offered by private nonprofit colleges, and 33% were offered by for-profit colleges. Under the accountability measurement, it was a measurement of a debt to earnings ratio. Roughly 9% of the programs failed this measurement, and 98% of those 9% were for-profit colleges. The rule ensured that students were not taking an unaffordable debt, and that programs that failed this measure would either close, like Trump University, or their institutions would make changes to ensure that their offered students are valued and the value of that education afterwards. Under the transparency measure, schools had to disclose relevant information in a standardized template. This is what the rule did. This made it easier for prospective students to compare apples to apples when looking at programs throughout their city, their state, or in the US. These disclosures included information on percentage of students that graduate, total program costs, percentage of students that borrow, average debt, the percentage of students paying down that debt, typical graduation earnings, job placement rates, whether the program meets state licensing requirements if needed for employment, whether the program meets the required debt to income ratio, or whether the program is preparing students for gainful employment in a recognized occupation. It's a lot of information. We're going to have resources later. If you didn't capture it, don't worry. We will have other places you can go to, such as the website I referred to earlier. But because of Trump and his Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, continuing education programs are no longer required to provide this very information to prospective students like you. So it's crucial for AFT members and others looking at these programs to ask for similar information to make an informed decision. Now that this rule has been rescinded, there are no guardrails on which debt students can take on. Important consumer information is being hidden. This is why AFT members need to do their homework. #do your homework. Because the elimination of the gainful employment rule raises the risk that students will enroll in low quality programs that leave them with unaffordable debt. It also means that they will not have the information they need before enrolling in a program. It is critical that students do their homework to research the colleges and the programs and comparison shop before enrolling to ensure they are getting the greatest value possible. Though this rule is a little technical, I don't want to lose sight of the reason we're here. AFT is here to protect the members, their families, and all prospective students from these predatory colleges that want to prey on unsuspecting students. So I've given you a lot of detail. Let's give you an example. I would like to introduce Michael Rosen from Local 212 in Milwaukee to talk about someone that went through a program that failed in gainful employment rule. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here. So I want to talk about a woman named Mai McCarthy, who was a student of ours. And when she was in high school, she was pushed into a forced marriage by her parents, and she became pregnant. The high school counselor, because of that, had her in a class for students who were pregnant and advised her to go to ITT Tech. So she enrolled at ITT Tech and began to try to pursue a college education. After about 6 months, she realized that the education was inferior, that the faculty were really not certified, and she dropped out. She was surprised to learn that she still had a $25,000 debt. And so for the next 5.5 years, instead of pursuing an education, worked to pay off that debt. She then matriculated to Milwaukee Area Technical College, which is where I met her. She was a brilliant student, a great student, active on the campus and with other students, and graduated in 2 years with honors, and then proceeded to transfer to the University of Wisconsin-Parkside, which is a public 4-year university. At MATC, she was in the Urban Teacher Education Program, which prepares students to become urban teachers. She graduated with honors from Parkside, and the good news is that she had paid off her debt and miraculously had graduated from Parkside and became a full-time teacher. And the pictures you're looking at are her and after finishing the first semester of her first year as a faculty member at the school in suburban Milwaukee where she's teaching. But then the bad news, or like a bad dream, ITT came back to haunt her. After successfully getting hired, ITT Tech sent her a bill for $5,000, saying that she still owed them that debt. So now Mai is trying to figure out how that could possibly be the case, since she paid off the $25,000 debt. This is just one example, and unlike many students, Mai succeeded. Partly, she was lucky enough to get remarried, and her husband had a good union job, and they were able to pay off the $25,000 debt. Many students who are in her situation get so mired in debt, they drop out and just never are able to get out of that debt. In her case, she paid it off, but now again, she's confronted with a bill collector saying she still owes $5,000. I actually work for the FAST fund that was set up, which is a emergency fund set up by Local 212 that helps students, and in this case, former students. And we've gotten her a lawyer who's trying to help her figure out exactly what happened here. But this is a classic example of what happens to students, particularly from backgrounds where there's no experience in higher education, and how schools like ITT Tech simply exploit them, rip them off, and leave them with nothing but broken dreams and greater in debt. And now I think I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Michael, for that reminder of what we are trying to prevent here. We don't want any AFT member or anyone in your family to face that kind of hardship, and that is why it is so important to do your homework, to do extra research on these programs to make sure that you're getting into a program of quality, because it is so hard to disentangle yourself. So I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of how to find this information that is no longer provided automatically. This will involve some links and screenshots to some websites that we're recommending, but don't worry about writing them down right now. The links and screenshots I'm using are available on our campaign website, aftcontinuinged.org, and also available in a printer-friendly format under the resources tab on that website. So, many schools will tell you that their program is the best and that you should sign up right now, but the information found on these websites will give you facts to help you make a sound judgment on if a program is really right for you. Comparing the factors like Jeff and Michael mentioned can really help you narrow down your choices and more accurately evaluate program quality. And so the first resource that we are recommending is called College Insights, and it is offered by the Institute for College Access and Success. And this is a website that allows you to search and compare for information by school that includes cost, average debt, completion rates, and loan repayment rates. So some of that information that used to be provided automatically under the gainful employment rule, you can look this up here using their College Spotlight tool. The second resource I want to mention is College Results Online, which is offered by the Education Trust, and it similarly allows you to search colleges and compare information across different institutions. This information focuses on retention rates, how many students are staying semester to semester, year to year, and earnings after graduation, and is broken down by race and income where possible, which is really useful for getting a sense of how students like you do at a particular school or a particular program. The next website I want to mention is called the College Scorecard, which is actually offered by the Department of Education. It allows you to comparison shop schools by locations and programs offered. So if you know that you're interested in a teaching program, for example, you can look at just institutions in your area that offer that program. This is the most mobile-friendly website of all of the resources that we're talking about today. It's fairly new. It's easy to pull up on your phone, even if you were at a campus visit or in an interview with an admissions officer. It would be easy to pull this up and kind of fact check the information that the school themselves is offering you. The next website is called College Navigator, also offered by the Department of Education, which allows you to see information by college and program. This is a little less mobile friendly, a little harder to look at on the fly or on your phone, but what it lacks in mobile friendliness, it really makes up for in detailed information. There's a lot of very good detailed information here on financial aid, net price, price history over the last 3 academic years to see if tuition is going up or going down, information about veteran and service members, accreditation information, student loan default rates, information for veterans and service members, lots of good stuff there. Also, speaking of veterans and service members, want to point out that the Department of Veterans Affairs offers this really comprehensive GI Bill comparison tool. If you or your members have the GI Bill, this is a great way to look up institutions and see how much of the cost the GI Bill covers, how many other GI Bill students are there, and a lot of great detailed information specific to the GI Bill. I also want to inform you about the Federal Student Aid's loan repayment calculator. We've been talking, all 3 of us have mentioned college cost and the burden of student debt. This is a pretty comprehensive loan repayment calculator that allows you to take into account not only the cost of an individual program, but the options available to you in paying that debt back if you need to take on student debt to afford continuing education. So again, all of this information is available on our AFT continuinged.org website. So I also just want to pause here with this picture of Betsy DeVos and acknowledge that this is a lot of work. I think I just went through 6 different websites. From AFT's perspective, it is not fair that this research burden is placed on individual students and families. We believe that there should be minimum standards of quality for all schools, which is why we have fought for a strong gainful employment rule since 2011. But Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos does not agree with us. This particular picture of her is from recent testimony in front of the House Education and Labor Committee on the processing of borrower defense to repayment claims. Borrower defense is when a school lies or misrepresents something to a student. That student can apply to have their student loans discharged because they were taken out under false pretenses. A student like mine might choose to do that. DeVos has been sitting on a couple 100,000 of these borrower defense claims even though she said that one of her goals is to prevent borrower defense claims and prevent students from getting ripped off. Well, that is exactly what the gainful employment rule was supposed to do. It was supposed to set minimum standards of quality so no one was being ripped off, and that everyone had the information that they needed to make an informed decision about pursuing any program of continuing employment. So the AFT will continue to fight for the restoration of a strong gainful employment rule for as long as it takes. But in the meantime, members must do their homework to ensure that their continuing education programs make the grade. So before we sign off tonight, I want to leave you with some top tips. If you remember nothing else, remember this. These are on the front page of our AFT continuinged.org website. And again, we urge you to do your research with the reliable websites that we've provided. And it is always a good idea to look at more than one program so you can compare information and outcomes. Don't get pressured into just going to one program that calls you or finds you. The second top tip is to find out how much the program costs and to consider carefully how you'll pay for it. And this should include total costs, including books, materials, or other fees that you'll need to pay, and consider how much will be covered by grants, which you will not have to pay back, scholarships or other aid that doesn't have to be paid back, and how much you may have to take out in loans, and how you will afford those loans after you graduate, and how that loan debt compares with any earnings bump you might expect to get. The next tip is to make sure the credits you earn, or make sure the program will get you the kind of job that you are looking for. This may sound obvious, but you should know that some jobs do require specific accreditation or licensing requirements, and you should check for those special requirements in your state. One way to do this is to see if your school can refer you to graduates already working in your field. Another top tip is to make sure the credits you earn will be recognized by other schools. Check to be sure the college you're considering is fully accredited, because accreditation can make a difference in whether employers will accept your degree for employment and whether you can transfer your credits. Ask questions. This is maybe another obvious one, but ask questions not just of the admissions office. Try and talk to students, to faculty, and alumni to get a good, well-rounded sense of what the school is like. And our last tip is to avoid red flags and pressure to enroll. On our website, aftcontinuinged.org, we have some more detailed information about what would be considered a red flag, but things like high default rates, financial instability, a history of lawsuits or investigations at the school would be something to avoid. If there's pressure to enroll from school admissions representatives, know that that might also be a red flag. Treat any pie-in-the-sky promises with skepticism, because if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So that's the information that we have for you today. Thank you so much for logging on to be with us this evening, this afternoon, and I'd be happy to take your questions. And again, my name is Nicole Hochsprung, and you can reach me at highered@aft.org if other questions occur to you after this webinar is over. Okay, I'm going to look at our Q&A. Okay. One question that I have for Michael and Jeff is, what would you tell local leaders who are hearing about this issue for the first time?
What I would ask local leaders to do is to get the website and distribute that information to their members, and let them know that if they're looking at any potential programs to expand their current jobs or careers, to be looking at this. And then if the local leaders want to watch this video or just go to the website and let people know about the website so they can find those resources.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I would, oh, I think I vanished there.
I can see you.
Okay, I can't see myself. I would of course, I agree with what Jeff said. I would also encourage people to uh, evaluate the local landscape and see what schools are there. Uh, Generally, you have a lot of for-profits, diploma mills is what I call them, and it might even be worthwhile to let your colleagues and students know which are the notorious ones, such as ITT, Everest, Corinthian College, Kaplan, Globe University if you're up in Minnesota, and just make people aware of them, because I'll give you one example. I one time had a student come to me and say, "You seem to know a lot about colleges. Could I'm interested in enrolling in Bryant Stratton." No, I'm sorry, Sanford Brown was the school, and I didn't know anything about Sanford Brown, so I Googled it, and what I looked for immediately was to see how it was accredited, and it was nationally accredited, which was a red flag. Most of our institutions are regionally accredited. The national accreditation was set up by the for-profits. So when I saw that, I told her that what, I was concerned about that, and I asked her what had she asked them about that, and she said yes, she had, and they had told her that they were nationally accredited because they were a national university, which was a total marketing ploy and nothing more. So I think a lot of students are, and I also asked her why she went there, why she was interested in going, and it was because we had a waiting list at the public university, at the public college. So I think that a lot of students get lured into this for a number of reasons, and it would be very useful to educate our own members about some of these schools and some of the recruiting tactics and pressure tactics Nicole mentioned. They're discussed in the materials being provided that they utilize, so that people are armed, and that when students ask you questions, you can give them good advice.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think issues like accreditation can get really complicated, especially for students who don't have a background in higher education, because in some ways, nationally accredited sounds better than regional accreditation. Right. But those are two networks of accreditors that do not talk to each other, and it is typically the regionally accredited institutions that are of higher quality and that have credits that are more widely accepted across different university systems, from community colleges to state universities and colleges to research universities and postgraduate institutions. So I'm not seeing any other questions in our queue, so I think we can go ahead and end our webinar a little early. But thank you, everybody who signed on to join us, and please feel free to send us questions later. Please feel free to visit our website, to share aftcontinuinged.org in your locals communications, like whether that be social media or newsletters or websites or what have you. We really want this information to get in front of as many members as possible.
Thank you, Nicole and AFT, for doing this.
Thanks,
Jeff and Nicole.
Thanks, Michael.
Have a great evening.
Yep.